right, so we have one more session left, and this last session is a solution session as well. It is 3 organizations that are working to deliver easier access to energy efficiency, financing for energy efficiency in Kansas City, in St. Louis. So if you'll join me in welcoming Mary, Ashley, and Malachi up here. And I think, is Malachi, are you up first? Yes. All right. So Malachi's up first. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Malachi Rein. I'm the director of the Building Energy Exchange St. Louis. We're a fairly new startup. Our official launch was last March in 2022. Ashley and I actually represent the first 2 building energy resource hubs outside of New York and Washington, D.C. in the country. So here in Missouri, we have 2. Nobody else has 1, but we're working on that. It's a pretty exciting time for us. There are a lot of things that are happening. I don't want to take any of your thunder, but I just want to take a step back for a minute and remind everybody of a few things. One, we spend most of our time inside. That's 90% by most statistics that you look at. So the indoor air quality, the buildings, they have a huge impact on your daily life. So this is a people-centric conversation. Sometimes we forget the people when we're talking about numbers and statistics, but we want to refocus it a little bit on the community and people benefits. I also want to ask, how many people have been busy in their lives at any point in time? Like, I know that sounds like a dumb question. Like, I have a 4-month-old at home. I think like my house, if I were to walk in the door today and the house was gone, I might not notice for a couple of hours, right? Like, I'm so hyper focused on whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish that moment. I mean, I walked into this building, I saw the door, I knew where I was going, I came in. I couldn't tell you what this building looks like. Could you draw it? I mean, realistically, do you know how much this roof weighs? Are we sitting under anything? We have grown up in a society where we've been surrounded by a built environment. So it's one of those things that it feels kind of static and eternal to us. And that's really one of the things that we're trying to constantly fight when we're talking about energy efficiency, because our buildings aren't static. They're very much alive and they're very much affecting us. I also want to remind everybody there's this thing called the principle of charity. And I really like the principle of charity. It basically says that most people are well-intentioned. So when you're trying to talk to them about something, their reactions might vary. But if you come to the conversation and say, ultimately, they probably have a driver that is has a good intention, that means that we have a capacity when we're talking about energy efficiency to meet those people somewhere. In the case of like me walking through my house, if it were one of my kids that we were talking about, that would grab my attention. So part of the task that Ashley and I have is to take this conversation from the 60,000-foot view and translate it for people who are making decisions in buildings in our community. Those people aren't buildings experts. They shouldn't be. They're running businesses. They've got lives. They've got a lot of stuff going on. So how do we engage those folks when we're talking about an existing building problem in efficiency? The majority of our buildings exist. The majority of our buildings now are still going to be there in a little bit, unless you're one of the University of Missouri campuses, in which case, happy demolition. And so we're trying to impact a community of people, private individuals, making decisions about buildings that they don't necessarily have the capacity or expertise to make an informed decision. So we are advocates, one, and most importantly, for building science, but also for good decision making. And that's in buildings, but also as it relates to workforce development. There is such an exciting conversation around energy efficiency because there's so many cool things tied to it. It creates jobs in the local, community. Heck, Randy, one of my board members, is here today. He's with Cambridge Air Solutions. They manufacture in St. Louis. We've been working with several organizations that create and sustain jobs in buildings beyond just the trades. We also have all of the trade organizations, which don't get the respect they deserve, considering all of the things that they do for us. So we need to make sure that we're elevating them in discussions. But we have the buildings themselves, where you do an efficiency improvement. Sure, it has a climate impact. Not everybody is really engaged in that discussion, but it also has impacts on our finances, has impacts on our health, comfort, well-being, has impacts on productivity, potentially worker retention. You notice when the temperature is wrong. I see people in here right now going like this. you don't necessarily notice what the functionality of the building is, how efficient the building is. These are unseen things. So as we try to create a lens for that, we need organizations working in the community with some expertise to try to make the policies that we're putting in place, like in St. Louis, the Building Energy Performance Standard, real for the people that need to make the decisions and engage in it. So there's got to be some cross. You can go ahead to the next slide. I'm just going to go through a couple of updates about what we've been doing. These are pretty laid back. Looking forward to questions. Ashley's got more on grants, so that's something to look forward to. We are doing a lot of collaborating. We're both here right now. We work across the state. We have a lot of conversations with people in Missouri. At the same time, on August 9th, Chicago launched the Building Energy Performance Hub, which is the newest of our network in Chicago. They were very confused that St. Louis did it first. We did everything first, but they'll catch up. They obviously don't watch baseball. I'm just saying, I mean, even our city burned down first. So like, they just got to catch up. But that, I know. Well, we'll talk about that later, but this network in the Midwest of just these three organizations provides great cross-state collaboration for Ashley and I in Missouri, across Illinois, where I have some territory of interest in the Metro East with Chicago. So we can make some impacts in a larger sense by having those discussions. Also, we shared the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance's conference earlier. I'll be speaking at that, so you should go to Indianapolis. So there's another plug there. As far as other things that we're doing while working together, I spoke for an audience of Fannie Mae's lenders and multifamily building owners this year with Boston, with Washington, D.C., and with New York, just to try to illustrate the fact that they need products to help people meet performance standards. They're growing as a way to impact existing building stock across the country. I know asking people to take out a mortgage isn't always the most attractive thing to do when you're trying to make efficiency upgrades, but you have to find the capital. Those kind of conversations elevate the profile of St. Louis. We are a great place to do good things. We've done a lot of things wrong. We're the city of Pruitt-Igoe. We're the city of a lot of things. We're in the Rust Belt. The arch is stainless steel. They found corrosion on that. We're working out all of these problems, but there's no better place in the country than Missouri to set an example for other communities around us in the Midwest. You can go on to the next slide. We try to create conversations to help build trust in the messaging. Because we are a nonpartisan nonprofit, we can talk about the building science in a way that people can rely on us, but we do want people to come to us so that we can have those discussions. We were featured in St. Louis along with folks from MIA in the Electrical Contractor magazine earlier this year. That's a nationwide publication for electrical contractors. That might surprise you by its name. We've been in the Riverfront Times talking about just different climate impacts in St. Louis, specifically in buildings. We've hosted webinars for our national partnership, including the most recent webinar, which is called Constructing a Sustainable Building Workforce, where we talk to people in St. Louis that are doing workforce development. We talked with Missouri S&T, as well as the Department of Energy, the federal U.S. Department of Energy. So again, setting an example of the work that we're doing so people can replicate it. Next slide, please. We are also working on creating a number of tools that people can use to try to bring success in this conversation. One of those is a service directory we've been working on for a while. We're still working on a few things there, but if somebody needs a particular service, we'll be able to plug them into a list of contractors or consultants from our website. We're working on a remote audit. So if you are in a situation where you just need to identify what projects to work on, yet you're not looking to invest in an ASHRAE level 2 audit or level 3 audit, we can actually do a very low cost, around $3,000 audit with an engineering firm that we've been working with, one of several. And you can get a path forward on how to do energy efficiency improvements in your specific building. That's also a low price point, which allows us to cover that cost in some cases where it may make sense to help bring people to the table. We have an owner-operator series that we've been utilizing throughout the year. So this is one of our educational opportunities where we're trying to walk people through how you do energy performance projects. It starts with benchmarking and measuring. We talk about capital planning, available incentives, and now we're going through project archetypes, looking at probably the easiest things to capture, so the operational savings, through to the end of the year where we're talking about major HVAC investments and controls. The angle that we're trying to do that through is one of operations. That's the background I come from. But in a realistic sense, you're not going to replace a boiler tomorrow because it's inefficient if it's working. We've heard that a few times today. It's a big investment. How do you make it more efficient? How do you make a good decision when that unit dies? In many cases, it's been dead for a while. We were joking about that. It's like there's somebody giving it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in the basement, and the company is just not willing to put the money into it. I've had an instance where it was a $1 million project. It was a cooling tower on top of a high rise from the 1970s. It was a wood frame. You could put your hand through the wood. This thing is 2 stories tall, sitting over the guy in charge. They didn't want to spend the money. And we're like, if this thing collapses, which it's about to do, it could kill you. Why would we want to spend money on that? But the energy savings from that new unit were enormous. It wasn't the reason they replaced it. Along with those tools, we're also working on other solutions. Like we're trying to capitalize on Energy Star treasure hunts. You may be familiar with those. They're free guidelines that you can find online. We're working with St. Louis City Hall on October 7th. We'll be doing a treasure hunt at City Hall with city administration to try to widen that conversation. We're partnering with Emerson to do that. We're also trying to take that conversation into the public school system in St. Louis so that we can not only show people how their actions have impacts on their school buildings, we can show them what the building's impact is, as well as helping to educate the people, both the staff and students in those environments, on all of the things that we're talking about. You can move on to the next slide, please. We also engage with the community a lot. Sometimes before I went back to school and got my degree in architectural engineering, I did some mid-level management and retail, which is horrible. But you do earn a little bit of a capacity to get yelled at. And so a lot of our engagements are really trying to find out what the sticking points are in implementing projects. We have to be listening to what people are complaining about and trying to figure out what the underlying reality is. Just a couple of examples. These aren't people that we had any negative interactions with. I'll just put that out there. But I've met with Landmarks St. Louis. We both care about buildings. It could be seen that the work we're doing maybe looking negatively towards old buildings. That's not. Buildings have a sense of place. They're important to the community. We want to make those buildings better, and we want to make them work for people. The second is the old Union Electric plant. It's now the Ashley Street Power Plant downtown, providing steam, district energy in St. Louis. How efficient is it? How can we get it into more buildings? Is this a viable solution? It's really neat. Not a whole lot of people are familiar with that. On the very end, there is a picture from above the lobby of the Fox Theater in St. Louis, going into some of these older buildings. That one's from 1929. They've had some really amazing efficiency improvements and projects in that building, not because they were trying to be efficient, but because they were trying to replace infrastructure from 1929 that was still operating as of 2 years ago. And the change that they felt is enormous. And those are the stories that we're trying to tell, is that it goes above and beyond just the basic ROI. In fact, when we've looked at ROI as a metric, the chief operating officers, the chief financial officers, they care a lot about ROI when they're doing projects budgeting. What tends to happen, though, is that you pay for the things that need to be replaced. So one of our big challenges is how do we layer cake those things together and figure out how to make a good capital plan that appeals to the people that are writing the bill or paying the bills, but is realistically tailored to the situations in those buildings as well. Next slide, please. Just a couple other brief things. We provide and share resources. So we partner with our utility companies, Ameren and Spire. They're great partners for us. They're both here. They provide us funding. I hope they continue to do that. You folks are great. But we want to share those incentives with people. We also have the capacity to act as a third party. If there are communities that don't necessarily trust the local utilities, don't necessarily trust local government, we can help I think provide traction in that conversation, give the resources to someone who can. We support and host educational events. So this was an event that we did at Winco Window, also another local manufacturer in St. Louis, to show people how things are done, to bring in folks that are doing the work and try to partner them with people that need work done. It's a really nice symbiotic relationship. And then the final slide, I believe, is just a list of our sponsors. So I want to say that I'm very thankful to the support of all of the folks that have been sponsoring us, but beyond sponsoring us, Also community organizations that we're continuing to work with and partner with. We have a project right now ongoing with the Community Builders Network in St. Louis that we're working alongside the Institute for Sustainable Communities, trying to do a pilot project of a solar installation in a Black or brown neighborhood in St. Louis. It's a really cool kind of hands-on project where we're going to learn what the challenges are so that we can extrapolate those, provide more resources, share those experiences. And that's basically all I've got. If you have an opportunity and you're in St. Louis and you're in Kansas City and you're trying to get work done, please give us a call. If you have funding opportunities that are tied to work, whether it's, something as simple as benchmarking in communities or, actually getting something off the ground, we're interested in building project pipelines. Give us a call. We are a resource to get the work done at scale in our cities. And we have a lot of things that we can be working on. And if you're already working on them and we can support you, that's where we want to be. So thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Sadowski, Director of Building Energy Exchange, Kansas City. Malachi walked you through a lot of the things that we both do, and I think one of the most delightful things about our network of building hubs is to see how each director and each staff and board takes their own take on what it means to be a building energy hub, and we learn from each other. So you can definitely tell there's a lot to be learned in St. Louis. We operate a little bit differently. We are an initiative of Climate Action KC, and we are housed in the Mid-America Regional Council. That is our regional planning organization. We work with them. It's a bi-state effort in both Kansas and Missouri to put together programming around energy efficiency and high performance buildings. And we came out of a regional climate action effort that was conducted a few years back before we got into the excitement of the IRA and other things around climate. And that determined that 63% of our greenhouse gas emissions came from buildings in our region. And so that really set the tone that if we were going to address climate, we had to address buildings first. So that's where we came about. And it was sort of a stars in alignment between that effort and a lot of the building energy hub momentum that was starting across the country. Next slide, please. So it's interesting, being a fairly new organization. We started in early 2021. We did a lot of needs assessments, talked to a lot of local folks on the building side. Just a little background on myself. I practiced architecture and was an urban planner and neighborhood planner for many years. And so had worked in the real estate sector for some time, certainly came with my own perspective on what some of those barriers are to building more sustainably, but really was intentional about talking to a lot of different folks across the region about what they felt were kind of holding us back from building better in our communities. And a lot of it really came back to funding and financing. And so we at this, preaching to the choir here, we all know how much of a barrier that's been over the last several years. We're at a different landscape, aren't we? Right? This is a time in which things are really very different in terms of how the federal government has stepped up to create market transformation for our region and bring us across the finish line. And we're seeing unprecedented levels of private investment following. So very different space. I will say in our first year before we were aware of what was coming, though we were hopeful, we brought together some studies. We got some national experts together. We started thinking about what it would look like if we created an investment fund in the region. We were thinking creatively about how do we use ARPA dollars? How do we find local philanthropy? And then infrastructure bill happened, and then IRA happened. So now we are in a different space, but we are still asking the same questions about how do you fund and finance these projects, and how do you do it effectively and reach down to the building owners themselves. I'm so grateful that we got the presentation right before ours that explained what all of these buckets of money are, because I don't have to, but I will say that I have spent a tremendous amount of time over the last year learning about each of these components and how they work together, working with some of our local nonprofits and local government leaders. Mid-America Regional Council is a great partner in that way, in that they herd the cats of local counties and cities and get them to work together on projects. So I've been trying to facilitate those conversations, and then building the capacity of our team and others to support on the building related incentives, tax incentives, rebates to come, being ready to be able to get those resources out to building owners directly. Next slide. So I thought I feel like sort of in the eye of a hurricane right now with all the different federal programs going. So I thought I'd just pause and show our work and say, here's what we've been doing and here's what we're thinking about, with the hope that maybe it sparks some interest from others about what things we've been doing. And I'm going to talk a little more in depth about one of the applications we submitted and our concept. It's the hope that that is something that really affects how our organization operates over the next several years. But I'll start by saying the Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant that was mentioned by our folks at the EPA, the Mid-America Regional Council received $1 million in that planning grant to help with climate pollution planning. We are fortunate, as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing climate planning for many years now. We had a greenhouse gas inventory that was conducted 3 years ago. So we have been working towards this, and now we're just 2.0 of that version. So one of the things that I'm helping the folks at MARC with is working on getting more nuanced on the building decarbonization side. Okay, we know 63% of our greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to buildings. Let's break that down further. Can we talk about multifamily buildings versus office? Can we talk about what Johnson County, Kansas is like versus Jackson County, et cetera, so that we can start to each own our piece of the pie, whether you're a multifamily building owner or you're a Johnson County commissioner, you kind of know what your inventory is, and we can start addressing that either from a policy level or in terms of allocating resources. Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation Grant. I know Mary's going to talk about that, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but I just want to say we worked in partnership on that grant opportunity and have a small role in terms of educating affordable housing providers, and we were recently awarded that, so really excited about that. Renewing America's Nonprofits Grant, that's one that we submitted early this August, which was to support our local nonprofits with capital to make energy efficiency improvements. So we worked with a number of nonprofits, as well as a group called Community Capital Fund, which provides a lot of grassroots community nonprofits and organizations, small grants to be able to say, if we are awarded that we'd have the grassroots capacity to reach all the nonprofits in Justice 40 communities that we want to serve. Buildings Up Prize. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So I'll pause on that. That was submitted in mid-July. Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We are working with EIERA on their Solar for All competition, as well as Malachi, with the idea that it's a statewide program, but there is certainly some specific approaches that need to be taken in Kansas City and St. Louis. We're working on a workforce training component, working with our local labor unions on that, and also working on the community outreach component of that, and working with some of our grassroots organizations on how we provide effective community outreach to get those dollars down to our neighborhoods. We're also in talks with some of the other folks, including Nina with the Coalition for Green Capital and some other folks, just to see how we can bring money to folks in Kansas City. There are questions out there in terms of, I know the Coalition for Green Capital has a database that they're putting together. Some of the other partners do as well. I've been just forwarding emails and saying, hey, get your projects in here, fill out the spreadsheet, let's get you on the list. So if you have a project in Kansas City, or you have any contacts in Kansas City or St. Louis, I'll speak for Malachi, I'm sure we can connect you to getting on that roster. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what our Buildings Up prize submission looked like, and knock on wood, because we don't know if we're going to get this, but hell or high water, we're going to do this project. So we worked in partnership with Community Builders of Kansas City, Jolly and Associates and Community Link, which are 3 community development institutions in Kansas City. Community Builders is a CDC, Community Development Corporation, that's been around for 25 plus years, has hundreds of affordable housing units, owns and operates 2 grocery stores in areas that would otherwise be food deserts, and has a significant amount of commercial property. Jolly and Associates, Terrell Jolly is a mainstay of Kansas City. He's one of those people that everybody in the community development space knows. He's been doing a lot of really great urban infill and retrofit work. And Community Link is a transitional housing services and permanent housing solutions, and they're looking to expand their building portfolio to serve that mission. So working with those 3 community builders and using energy as a community development tool. So thinking about who benefits, like starting with the players that have been doing work in Kansas City for many years. I've worked with many of these folks in my previous life as a planner and designer, and using the infrastructure they've built and the mission that they have to integrate energy into the work that they already do. Next slide. Premise is simple, and I will not claim originality. This comes from a lot of a precedent. We've spent the last couple of years really understanding how other people are making this work happen. Certainly in some of our larger coastal cities, they've had more regulation, they've had more policy that has pushed them into the high performance space. They also have developed a tremendous amount of tools as a result. There are what are called retrofit accelerators popping up all across the country. New York City has probably one of the most prominent one. I think they have 70 staff that operate their facility. And so we look to replicate those in some form or fashion based on how we think it would work best in Kansas City and how it would work best with working with these community development institutions. So working with residents, working with local building owners, and working with energy professionals to make sure we're setting the bar for how we think buildings should perform as we retrofit them, and ensuring that the utility savings are accurate in how we update our buildings. And then hustling to find capital, private, public, philanthropy, you name it. I've talked to a lot of different folks over the last year. I will continue to do that. And certainly if we are fortunate enough to get this prize, that's a big part of what the prize allows us to do, is have the capacity to hustle for that funding. And use that to create competitive lending for mission-driven building owners. The idea being that with the level of energy savings that we could see in some of these retrofits, many of these buildings, there's some pretty low-hanging fruit there. We could easily see a clean return on investment, both in terms of carbon, but also in terms of clear cash. And then lastly, just leading what success looks like. It looks like high performance buildings that are low carbon. It looks like lower utility bills. It looks like significant increases to community health. These are all the bars that we're setting for what this lending could look like. And at the end of the day, this could apply to a number of different market types, as long as we have a clear direction in terms of how that develops a given neighborhood, and that there's stakeholder input along the way. So this could be affordable housing. This could be small business. This could be community centers, what have you. Just what are those components that make a neighborhood, and how do you get the right stakeholders at the table? Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, we have this kind of core 4 of the 4 of us that are working together. But really, I think we all want to be able to learn together. There's so many more community developers beyond the 4 that are part of this coalition. And so we were really intentional about Yes, we want to update your portfolio. Yes, we want to use it as a pilot project, but how can we show our work to all the other folks in the community development space, to the public agencies, to other people nationally who are trying to learn from us, other people in St. Louis. And we had 4 what we called community classroom conveners. These are folks that are already engaging with the audience in a community development space. These include Community Capital Fund. I mentioned them earlier as a partner for the nonprofit grant. Regional Housing Partnership, which is in the process of establishing a regional housing trust fund with the idea that we could couple those affordable housing trust fund dollars with what we're trying to accomplish here. Urban Land Institute, I've been actively involved with them for many years. They have a program called the READY program, which connects and grows grassroots real estate professionals who have some connection to real estate and are interested in entering the development space. And then, as I mentioned, we're an initiative of Climate Action KC, which convenes people across the 2 states and multiple counties around climate related issues. So there's a number of forums that would allow us to show what we're doing there as well. Next slide. I always like to share resources at the end. So these are specifically catered to building owners. So if you are a building owner or you have others around you who are building owners who don't know where to start, because there are a lot of boxes and a lot of things to consider, I would recommend our short list of federal programs for building owners. That is specific to what is available today in terms of tax incentives. It talks about the rebates, but it's not necessarily going to bog them down with all of these other programs that have not necessarily are not necessarily catered to them, or at least they're not yet. Technical primers. Malachi shared this as well. This is sort of the building blocks to moving towards net zero. So when I have a lot of folks who are just very early in this conversation, and so they're like, what do you mean by high efficiency, high performance, net zero? And it's like, let's start with what are the building blocks based on your building? It's going to look different for everybody. For somebody, it's going to be about weather stripping. For somebody else, it's going to be about insulation. For others, it's going to be about rooftop solar. So we provide a guide for each of those different components and cost benefits of what those are. It's a good starting point. Rising Trades Contractor Accelerator Program. I think I've spoken about that a couple times, so I didn't dwell on it this time, but we've had 15 diverse construction businesses participate in that. These are business owners who are looking to grow their business like any entrepreneur would. We provide them 40 hours of back office support. We connect them to mentors, and then we help them co-create a clean energy growth plan, which is to say they have an existing scope of work that they are competent in, they're familiar with. Let's say you're an electrician, you've been doing that for years. We say, okay, well, how do you elevate that to know how to do solar? How do you connect to EV charging? How do you connect to panel upgrades as people start replacing units? So we are always looking for more contractors, always looking to grow that program. So feel free to connect me. We're pretty loose on the geographic constraints of those contractors. So please let me know, or just forward them. risingtrades.org is where you can find information on that. And then feel free to reach out. My email's there. I'm always happy to have a conversation about what you're working on, or if there's a collaboration, or if you just kind of want to hear more about some of the things I just discussed. So thank you.
Hey, in the home stretch here, right? Thank you to Josh and Mia for inviting me to be part of this panel with Metropolitan Energy Center. If you wouldn't mind, next slide, please. So the Metropolitan Energy Center, we turned 40 years old this year. We're one of the oldest non-for-profits in this space. We too have a hub called the Energy Solutions Hub. I manage the building performance department for Metropolitan Energy Center, but we also have a transportation department. Please don't ask me any questions though about transportation, but I can certainly put you in touch with the transportation department manager if you'd like to talk about that. But we are a resource hub for buildings as well. We disseminate information on building science and building best practices for both the commercial and residential world. We do it though at the intersection of equity and best practices. So this is a conversation that is very tightly tied to just our economic system and opportunities or lack thereof for different populations across the city. And as I think was mentioned earlier by Malachi and Ashley, this is a tidal wave of money, but we need to manage it well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about several areas that we've been collaborating, because I think that's key. There's no way that we're going to be able to spend that money in silos and succeed in a market transformation. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background in Metropolitan Energy Center, and more information on what we're doing. We have been contracted with the city of Kansas City, Missouri for the last 2.5 years. We'll continue on with that contract into next year to provide energy code training and training on best practices to municipalities and building code officials. We just actually finished up with our commercial code on the 2021 IECC last week for our 3rd time. And that was very well received. We presented to sort of larger, we'd been doing the training for building code officials, and last week it was more developers and contractors in the room that now are facing a new energy code package in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's imperative that with the resistance that was sort of pushing back against that policy initiative, that we educate. The goal is to educate the pushback away, get them over to our side when you talk about the impact of best practices in the built environment on occupancy health. Next slide, please. Before I get to that though, MEC does have the contract with the city of Kansas City, Missouri to facilitate the private building owner benchmarking compliance. We actually have a customer service desk. It's one of our customer service reps, Danielle. We sit at the phone and they answer your calls about how to benchmark. Somebody earlier in the presentation said that benchmarking, somebody has to be responsible for that and they have to gather their bills and submit them. Well, we try to make that easier at Metropolitan Energy Center because we're trying to increase the compliance rate so we can have follow St. Louis and have a minimum building standard. I know I've heard the rumor is the goal in the Kansas City area, because first, you can't improve what you don't measure, but there's no point in doing that measurement if there's no step after that. We need to improve our buildings. We know that. Next slide, please. So we did advocate. We were one of the main sort of advocates in City Hall these last 2 years for that 2021 IECC. This is the first code package in the Kansas City metropolitan area that was not watered down. No weakening amendments. And we actually led the entire nation on that bill passage. I think Chicago might have been a couple of weeks before us, but they had a few weakening amendments or at least didn't have strengthening electrification stretch codes, which Kansas City, Missouri added into the code package. But again, we can't just advocate and walk away. We have to advocate and educate and support. And Metropolitan Energy Center sort of has a mission to change the conversation about our buildings and then be there to help interpret any questions on best practices, funding opportunities, and such. Next slide, please. we're trying to provide best practices. I do think somebody in an earlier presentation said something about energy assessments being needed, and I believe that to be accurate. I've been in this space for 16 years. I didn't give you any background on myself, but I've been in building performance for 16 years. I started out as a small business owner. I've worked in the trenches and have a lot of experience with showing payback after payback after payback on energy audit reporting. That is better than any financial product that anybody can invest in, and it's still being set aside as not a priority. And it's Malachi, we were talking earlier that, you just look for the door and walk into the building. You take it for granted that you're going to be relatively comfortable, and it's going to keep the rain off your head. The average person just doesn't think about the benefit of building performance. And it's up to us to go into the communities and educate folks as to the benefits of not just affordability, but maintenance costs. Earlier this year, Ashley and I run into each other a lot at these functions in Kansas City, and we were presenting at the Urban Land Institute a sidebar conversation to the BOMA conference there. And I presented from one of our board members, was actually the real estate development manager for a major telecommunications company. She pushed that company to start building to LEED, and they built 175 stores to LEED certification. And one of the major things they found is each store saved $1,500 a year on average on maintenance per just one retail store. So 175 times 1,500 times just 1 year, that adds up. So it's really important that we are as vocal and repetitive about this economic benefit, but there are also the critical benefits of health and equity and resiliency as well. Next slide, please. So just going to leave it on this slide because that's all the slides I have. But we too, and going back to the collaboration, we try to keep in conversation with the Building Energy Exchange since they were established. It could be seen as a lot of duplication. And Ashley and I committed to making sure that we didn't duplicate as much as feasibly possible, given also the direction of our relative boards. And I think it's worked out well. So we also have a Buildings Up application submitted for a totally, completely different project. And we stayed in conversation about our respective applications. So maybe we would get 2 acceptances rather than the award givers just giving us 1 in for our region. So, and Kansas City itself, before I got this position, again, I was in the private sector, I was a contractor. I always kind of felt that Kansas City had a silo problem where we were working in the same different, but similar silos and not really cross-pollinating. I feel that it's really been the Climate Action Kansas City Spur and your establishment of Building Energy Exchange has actually kind of blown that sort of paradigm away a little bit, and that we are talking more across our different non-for-profits and trying to combine our resources to create a benefit for the entire community and populations that have been traditionally disinvested. So the main grant that Ashley mentioned that I was going to talk about did come out of the infrastructure bill, way ahead of, this flood of money now that's coming from the IRA. And it was specifically for communities that wanted to, learn about, support, and adopt better code policies, starting with the IECC 2021 or better. And it just so happened it coincided with the big code push in Kansas City, Missouri. And I saw this opportunity, and we just ran, the MEC just took off running. We needed a state energy office. So we have some partners in the room from the State Energy Office that co-signed with us on this grant application. And then we went and talked to many community organizations that MEC had previously worked with. But I'd say this was a unprecedented effort in this across the state, in that we've brought almost 30 partners together, with the majority of them of community-based organizations. Couple of you are in the room here as well. So Malachi and Ashley with Beeks, St. Louis and Kansas City are partners. We have Richard back with Missouri Botanical as a partner. Justin in the back that's talking about, asked some really good questions about how the money is going to get down into the communities. And the only way that's going to happen is if we engage the communities right up front and talk with what their expectations are, what their needs are, and then connect those dots with the private industry. This application is for a jobs pipeline. And so we're going to be training and recruiting from Justice 40 communities, predominantly Justice 40 communities, to get young adults into the classroom to learn about the energy efficiency vocations that are going to support the IECC 2018, 2021, and to come 2024, because these code packages are very systems test heavy, and you need energy efficiency vocational technicians to be able to do those tests. And we feel confident with the community organizations that are partnered with us for this grant opportunity across both Kansas and Missouri, both states, that, you know, it'll be a lot of hard work, but I feel with the collaboration and the partnerships that we've made, that we will succeed and that we will transform the market, not just into a sustainable workforce. That's important. Sustainable, not just in buildings, but in sustainable of business. Didn't happen in the last round of this, unfortunately. It failed to take root. And so we are right now suffering from a lack of contractors. And so this is the beginning, I hope, of many job training programs. We also have an application submitted into the Solar for All that would also include a jobs training component. So we hope we get that, because we'll have the infrastructure, we hope, underway with this jobs pipeline for the testing technicians for both commercial and residential systems. If we can build on and not reinvent the wheel and collaborate with each other and use each other's existing infrastructure, i.e. wheels, you know, we can move this as quickly as is needed in order to be successful. Because if we're not successful, this huge billions and billions of dollars that are coming down, we don't know when we're going to get another chance, right, to transform. And we probably just have one chance. Just get in my soapbox here. You know, Canada, I read an article last week that the state size of New York is burned so far up in Canada. It's time that we stop tiptoeing around what's going on here and work as quickly as possible to make this succeed. And I'm done. So I think we're ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not on. All right, do we have any questions for Ashley, Malachi, or Mary? No, you made it to the end of the day. We're a little bit over, but I hope you all believe or can see that, like, there's a lot of good work that's going on. You were talking about jobs, right? In the news as well. State Tech just had its third in a row record-breaking registration for students. They're expanding, right? So that type of work is definitely being more sought after. So a lot of opportunities, and definitely, if you have any questions, reach out to those folks. If you can collaborate, intertwine what you're doing. The word I heard today, I think the word of the day is braid, right? So we're gonna like braid everything. But couple of key things. Well, let me first say, give our panelists a round of applause, please. And if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and do the close. Quick thing is that December 7th is the Midwest Energy Policy Series on economic development in St. Louis. It too will be a hybrid event, but I think you all are a perfect example of why in-person works. So please put that on your calendar. As far as a lot of the conversations here today, you will get a PowerPoint. You will get the video. We will put them up online as well for you to see. We do have a IRA worksheet that's on our website that you can use to track the different opportunities to get funding from. So we are trying to track that. If you are looking for it, looking for a collaborator, we are working to facilitate that for you. Our goal on that part is just to see Missouri get more funding. Not necessarily that we're part of it. We just want to connect your dots that way. If I can thank Rachel and Matt for their great work organizing today and behind the scenes. And thank you to the board members that are here from MEI, and thank you most importantly to the sponsors. Wish you all a great day, travel safe home, and I look forward to talking with you all soon. There was a question, if anybody wants to take a group photo, you're welcome to come up front and join. If not, you're okay. But Malachi had asked, and there's a good group of folks here all in the same industry.
Great job, Josh. I got